Good afternoon, class. My name is Kane Baxter. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about one of my favorite forms, well, genres in media. It is the cyberpunk genre. So, let's jump right into it. First of all, what is the cyberpunk genre? First and foremost, it's just a subgenre of sci-fi. It'll be grouped in there with steampunk, if you know what that is, the post-apocalyptic genre, the dystopian genre, and most recently, solar punk. And all of those will pretty much sit underneath the science fiction as a whole. It's a genre that focuses heavily on futuristic worlds, so think flying cars or space travel, advanced AIs and robots and laser guns, things of that nature. Unlikely heroes. In the majority of stories you see in this genre, whether it be novels, movies, TV shows, video games, the main protagonist is usually a reluctant hero. They usually don't want to be a part of the main story. They don't want to be the driving factor in it, or they're an anti-hero, somebody who has no problem killing, stealing, lying, cheating, just all around not the kind of character you would think would be a hero. Next is they focus heavily on the corporate greed. And I'll touch on that later on in a little bit here throughout it. Okay, where it came from. Popularized in the 80s by mainly novelists, but later on a few really good movies. The cyberpunk genre didn't really pick up ground until an author by the name of William Gibson and his novel Neuromancer. In his novel Neuromancer, William Gibson pretty much took all the elements that was cyberpunk and brought them together and had them mesh well enough to where the public took notice and wanted more. In his novel Neuromancer, he coined the terms cyberpunk, which is the name of the genre, and the term cyberspace. I didn't know that. I never actually thought about where that term came from, but apparently it was this author who made both of those. And ironically enough, this author, William Gibson, he didn't like being associated as the creator of this genre, because one reason being he didn't want to feel boxed in, and also it was already around. The elements and the themes and the aesthetic was already in place for decades prior, up until about, I think, the late 50s. It was all of these different things right here, but he just happened to be the guy to bring it all together and give it a name. And so he's pretty much known as the pioneer of the genre itself. Okay, moving on to my favorite portion of and one of my favorite parts of the genre itself is the aesthetic. This is better if you can see it. That's a little better. A neon landscape. Okay, the cyberpunk genre is most notably, visually noticeable through its use of bright neon blues, pinks, purples, a lot of times reds, greens, oranges, to pretty much light up the scenery. All throughout here, you'll see the use of regular spotlights, ad boards, holographic ads, and just different uses for it. It's, I feel like it gives it a real, it gives it more appeal, because you need something pretty to look at when you have a genre that's as bleak as this can turn out to be. Here's another really good example of the aesthetic of cyberpunk. Like I said, a lot of the neon blues, greens, pinks, purples, and something you can notice in this visual a lot better is how rainy, how dark, stormy, and kind of dingy it looks. That's a focal point of the aesthetic as well. A lot of stories you see rarely will take place in a bright lit, happy scenario, pretty much. So using these bright colors in contrast with the dark and dreary and moody vibe, it's like, I find it very appealing. Next is the urban jungle aspect. We hear the term urban jungle and we might think like cities like Los Angeles, New York, or maybe Tokyo, Hong Kong, things like that. And it's very literal in the sense of the name, urban jungle, so a city that feels like a jungle. But when it comes to this sort of genre, it is very literal in the sense. With the overpopulated and densely packed cities, since this is a science fiction genre, all the stories pretty much take place hundreds, if not thousands of years in the future. And with that time also comes a rise in human population. And cities have to try to adjust to that, so they start making what are called hive cities and megastructures. These megastructures are pretty much mile-high, miles around buildings that can house up to tens of thousands, possibly millions on the bigger scale. Aside from apartment complexes, they can also be headquarters for different corporations. And I've even seen a few iterations where they have buildings like this that can block out the sun pretty much, that were just like parking structures. People bring their car up, and then they'll like scan it in, and then they'll hover in, and then just get packed in with everything else. All they gotta do is come down, type in a code, and they'll bring their car to them. It's ridiculous. Like all of these cities right here, I'm not sure if you can see it too well, but all of these cities at the foreground are regular skyscrapers. So let's say this building is an Empire State level size, and just the scale alone is crazy to me. I've always really admired those kind of buildings though, because visually they look cool, but what they're intended for isn't really the most like appealing, but I've always admired the way they look. This one it's pretty hectic. You might not even be able to see what's going on here, but there's rows shooting through these city blocks right here. All of these are standard apartment buildings, shops, different businesses like that. It's a lot easier to see right here. But this one right here is a ground level view one of the best ground level views I could find. This is a person on a motorcycle for scale, and yeah, like I was saying, it's just ridiculous how big some of these buildings can be compared to standard skyscrapers. And yeah, it's just crazy. I've always thought it was crazy. Okay, moving on to the main themes of the genre. One of the biggest themes, and across any form of media you see this in, you'll see that it really highlights the class divide when it comes to its citizens, between the haves and the have-nots. The haves are what are referred to as corporals or corporates, the people who run the businesses, who work in them, or celebrities, politicians, people like that. They hoard a lot of wealth. And within these mega cities, one corporation could run miles of it, or could run entire megastructures just for themselves, racking in billions, hundreds of billions of dollars every year. And yeah, they're not the most generous of people as well. So greed within these worlds is like pretty much a norm. You expect somebody with this crazy amount of money to hold it for themselves. And with the upper class citizens, majority of them have access to the best clothes, the best security, the best cars, the best homes, and even the best health care. I played a game where a character was near death, pretty much near death, going into shock. Immediately, with a chip installed in their neck, they were able to call a EMT, got to them within a minute, because flying cars, of course, got to them within a minute, resuscitated them, they were up walking around within 10 minutes, gave them the medication they needed, everything. So it's pretty crazy with how much, with how much access they have with just their money alone. And it really just highlights the inequalities between the upper level and the lower level people. Where the upper levels will sit cushy in custom, pretty much spaceships, the ones that hover around the city, they're able to look down upon everybody else. The lower levels, or the working class, pretty much are stuck in slums. So if they're not stuck in the megastructures, the overcrowded ones, they're stuck in slums. Pretty much cities they have to build themselves at the lowest level of the megastructures. A lot of them are dark, dingy, dirty, crime-ridden. Gangs run pretty much at each and every other corner. It's just not the most, it's not very appealing at all to be a normal citizen in these worlds. And yes, like I was saying, any normal citizen, working class, pretty much has to fight for everything they have. When it comes to a job, when it comes to money, homes, everything like that. Everything is a struggle to get all the time. It's the corporate greed, the gangs, society collapsing. Everything seems to be pushing against working class people within this genre, which is why, leading into my next point, the crime and disorder throughout all of these forms of media when it comes to cyberpunk is ridiculous. Many stories start with either some sort of corporate espionage level, or your protagonist always ends up being some kind of criminal. They could be a hacker or some kind of low-level street thug. I've even seen some where they're like bosses, mafia bosses. I've read some novels where they're like already legit in that world. And one thing that I think is very prominent within this genre is the use of cybernetics. And the term high-tech, low-life always comes into play whenever you read or want to learn about cyberpunk. The term is very literal. High-tech meaning technologically advanced, low-life, criminals. You'll see right here, these characters right here. This one, he has a cybernetic arm replacement. So does he. He's got metal plates all in his head. Probably has some kind of CPU installed into his brain. And then both of these characters have eye implants, or they replace their eyes with cameras. And then these characters, if you ever played the game Cyberpunk 2077, you'll know who these guys are. They're a gang of over-augmented individuals. They try to make themselves as least human as they can to appear scarier and to like set themselves apart from everybody else. This guy right here replaced his whole like ocular lobes with a camera in the shape of a spider. And thirdly, one of the biggest and most prominent aspects of the genre is its take on transhumanism. Transhumanism is the notion that humans can and will use technology to push their bodies and minds past their limits. And like I was saying, a big aspect of this genre with just the people is their use of cybernetic augmentations. They'll replace whole limbs with a robotic one. They'll replace their eyes with cameras. They'll install CPUs within their brain. Anything they can, anything you can think of to augment yourself or make yourself better, they'll do just freely. And it's not just military or spies or the government that do this, it's everybody. Like, in this class right now, if we lived in one of these worlds, at least 90% of this class would have some sort of cybernetic augmentation, whether it be, yes?
What's the difference between a cyborg and a transhuman then?
Cyborgs are...
Aren't they like human robots too?
Yes, it's the same thing. Transhumanism is just the idea that people will use technology to enhance themselves. A cyborg is somebody physically doing it. So like if I walked in and I had maybe robotic arms, a CPU in my head, cameras for eyes, I'd be a cyborg because I'm not completely human, but I still have my heart and my brain intact. So and I still have my free will as a human. So a cyborg is just a person who's pretty much followed through with transhumanism. Thank you for that. Next are a few notable examples. These just so happen to be my favorites. First are the Netflix show Altered Carbon. And this one, it heavily, it's a really good example of the class divide between the upper level and the lower level people. And here, one of the main focal points of the show is that people were able to download their consciousness onto these little things called stacks. You slip them into the back of your neck, and you pretty much can control whatever body you want to. So somebody who's a billionaire can clone themselves hundreds of times, and when one body is too old and maybe decayed, they'll take that out, put it into a new one that's 50 years younger. And so they'll be able to keep living on and on and on. Whereas the working class people don't have access to that. So pretty much, in this one, they bought immortality, which was a crazy, crazy storyline. And moving on to the Blade Runner series, the original and the 2049. In the original, Harrison Ford's character would hunt these pretty much made people called synths. The synths were people. They had heart, mind, blood, brain, but they weren't born. They were grown. So they weren't considered people, and they were used as no really light way to put it. They were used as slaves, and they didn't have rights at all. And when one would go rogue, because they would feel like they deserved more, because they felt like they were human. Essentially, they were, but they weren't. They just weren't born. They would send guys like him to hunt them. And in Blade Runner 2045, the sequel, we actually follow a synth. And he does the same exact thing. He hunts other rogue synths. The whole story for the second one is completely different from the first one. In the second one, you get to see it from his point of view as a synth, as a made human, and his daily life. You follow him throughout his duties. You see his inner turmoil when it comes to hunting his kind, and seeing that all they want to do is be free. It's a really, really good movie. I do recommend seeing it. And probably one of my favorite forms, well, not even just my favorite, the thing that got me into this genre so heavily was the Cyberpunk game that was released in 2020. I started playing it in 2021 when it got fixed and got better. But if you're looking to get into the genre, this game has probably the best forms of each of the themes all together. It has really, really good, it has a lot to say about the class divide between the upper and lower, as well as having plenty of cybernetic augmentations. It's one of the focal points of the gameplay, along with having a really intriguing anti-hero protagonist who you play as. I really admire it. I really enjoy it. Okay, we're coming to the conclusion portion of my my slides, but I want to take a minute to see if anybody else has any more questions about the genre, or if maybe they want me to clarify some things at all. Oh, Deacon.
Have you played a tabletop version of Cyberpunk?
I did, but I couldn't get into it. I tried to, but tabletop games just aren't for me. It's the same with Warhammer.
What's that light in your hand?
Oh, it's just a little rolling code. It's the Matrix rolling code. It was a keychain, but I broke the keychain off and I just brought it with me. I was gonna use it as like a little pointer to like keep your guys' attention at a area, but I just kind of fiddled with it the entire time. But is that it?